The rain didn't just fall on Blackwood Manor, it assaulted it. It was a torrential, angry deluge that hammered against the stone walls as if trying to wash the house off the face of the cliff and into the churning sea below. Inside the armored Mercedes, Elias Diamond watched the water distort the world outside the window. He was 34 years old. He was a billionaire 3 times over. And if the family history held true, he had exactly 6 months left to live. His hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar acquisition deals without a tremor, were currently gripping the leather armrest so hard his knuckles had turned the color of bone. He breathed in, trying to steady the racing of his heart, but the air in the car felt thin, recycled, and suffocating. "We are approaching the gate, sir," the driver said. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting Elias's gaze for a split second before darting away. The driver was new. He didn't know the stories. Or perhaps, judging by the way his hands tightened on the steering wheel, he had heard the rumors and was praying they weren't true. Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt like it was constricted by a wire. He just nodded, turning his gaze back to the monolith of grey stone rising out of the mist. Blackwood Manor. The place where the Diamond dynasty began, and the place where every firstborn Diamond son had ended. The iron gates groaned open, a sound like a dying animal, allowing the car to crunch over the wet gravel. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the front steps where a solitary figure stood waiting. It was Arthur. The butler had served Elias's grandfather, then his father, and now he stood waiting for the last of the line. The old man looked like he was made of parchment and cobwebs, shivering slightly in the damp wind, a lantern held in a shaking hand. Elias stepped out of the car, and the cold immediately bit through his cashmere coat. It was a supernatural cold, the kind that settles in the marrow of your bones and refuses to leave. "Welcome home, Master Elias," Arthur said. His voice was a dry rasp, barely audible over the wind. He didn't smile. Diamonds didn't smile at Blackwood. "It's not a home, Arthur," Elias muttered, buttoning his coat as he walked up the stairs, avoiding the dark stains on the limestone that looked suspiciously like old rust, or dried blood. "It's a graveyard with a wine cellar." "Is Graves here?" "In the library, sir," Arthur replied, closing the heavy oak doors behind them, shutting out the storm but trapping the silence inside. The silence of the manor was heavy. It pressed against Elias's ears. He has been drinking, sir." He said the noises were getting louder. Elias stopped, his foot hovering over the first step of the grand staircase. He turned slowly to look at the old butler. The lighting in the hallway was dim, provided by flickering sconces that cast long, dancing shadows against the portraits of dead ancestors. "What noises, Arthur?" Arthur hesitated. He looked down at his polished shoes, his lower lip trembling. "The walking, sir. In the west wing. And for the counting." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. "The counting?" "Someone counting backwards," Arthur whispered, his eyes wide and watery as he finally looked up. "From 30. Elias clenched his jaw, forcing a mask of anger over his fear. "That's enough. It's the plumbing. Old pipes. I'll fire the maintenance staff in the morning." He turned and marched up the stairs, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the cavernous hall. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in compound interest, leverage, and market volatility. He was a man of the 21st century. He would not be frightened by a drafty house and a senile butler. But as he reached the landing, he couldn't help but glance at the portrait of his father, William Diamond. The paint seemed to catch the light in a way that made the eyes look wet. Alive. And judging. He pushed the thought away and strode toward the library. The double doors were slightly ajar, and the smell of stale cigar smoke and expensive scotch wafted out. Elias pushed the door open. "Graves, I told you to have the liquidation papers ready by." He stopped. The library was a wreck. Books were pulled from the shelves, lying in chaotic piles on the Persian rug. Papers were scattered everywhere, covering the mahogany desk like snow. And in the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed leather chair facing the fireplace, was Marcus Graves. The family lawyer was disheveled, his tie undone, his hair wild. He was muttering to himself, rocking back and forth. Graves. Elias stepped into the room, stepping over a fallen encyclopedia. Graves spun around, his eyes wild, bloodshot and terrified. He held a crystal tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a fireplace poker in the other. "Stay back," he screamed, backing into the mantel. "I told you I wouldn't do it. I won't sign the renewal." Elias held up his hands, palms open, trying to de-escalate the man. "Graves, it's me. It's Elias. Put the poker down." Graves blinked, the madness in his eyes receding slightly as recognition set in. He lowered the weapon, his shoulders slumping. "Elias? Oh God. Elias, you shouldn't have come. You should have stayed in London. You should have changed your name and hidden in a hole." "I'm selling the estate, Marcus," Elias said, his voice firm, trying to inject some sanity into the room. He walked over to the desk and began gathering the papers. "I'm selling the company. Everything. I'm ending the legacy." Graves let out a high, hysterical laugh. He took a swig at the whiskey, the amber liquid spilling down his chin. "You can't sell what you don't own, boy. The assets, the ships, the towers, the gold, they aren't ours. We're just holding them. We're the custodians." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "And the owner is coming to collect." Elias slammed a file onto the desk, the loud crack making Graves flinch. "Stop it! I am sick of these riddles. My father spoke like this before he drove his car off the cliff. My grandfather spoke like this before he put a bullet in his brain. It is a sickness, Marcus. A genetic delusion. And I am not going to catch it." "It wasn't a delusion," Graves hissed. He stumbled toward Elias, grabbing him by the lapels of his coat. The lawyer smelled of fear, a sour, metallic sweat. "I saw the ledger, Elias. I found it in the wall safe behind your father's portrait. The date is set. Your birthday. The debt comes due." Elias shoved the man back. "You're fired, Graves. Get out. I'll have Arthur call you a cab." "You can't fire me," Graves wept, collapsing into the chair and burying his face in his hands. "I signed as the witness. I'm part of it now. We can't leave. The house won't let us." Elias turned away, disgusted and shaken. He needed air. He walked to the window, staring out at the storm. Lightning flashed, illuminating the jagged cliffs below. For a second, just a fraction of a second, Elias thought he saw a figure standing on the edge of the cliff. A tall, dark shape, watching the house. He blinked, and the darkness returned. "I'm going to bed," Elias said, his voice flat. "Sleep it off, Marcus. We sign the papers in the morning." He walked to the library door, grabbing the heavy brass handle. It didn't turn. He frowned, twisting it harder. "Locked." "Graves, give me the key," Elias said, annoyed. I don't have the key," Graves whispered from the chair. "The doors, they do this sometimes. When he is listening." "Who is listening?" Elias shouted, rattling the door violently. "Arthur! Arthur, open this door!" Silence. No footsteps in the hall. No response. Then, the temperature in the room plummeted. Elias could see his breath misting in the air. The fire in the hearth didn't go out, but the flames turned a sickly, bruised purple. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, detaching themselves from the walls. "Elias?" The voice came from right behind his ear. It was wet, guttural, and sounded exactly like his father. Elias spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. There was no one there. Just the empty air and the terrified lawyer cowering in the chair. "Did you hear that?" Elias whispered, his skepticism cracking. Graves nodded, tears streaming down his face. "He's here. The first son." If you are enjoying the story so far and want to see if Elias survives the night, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next. Elias backed away from the center of the room, his back hitting the cold wood of the door. "This is a trick," he muttered, closing his eyes. "Holograms. Speakers. Someone is trying to scare me into selling cheap." "Look at the clock," Graves said. Elias opened his eyes and looked at the grandfather clock standing in the corner. It was an antique, worth more than most houses. The pendulum was swinging, but the hands were moving counterclockwise. Spinning rapidly backwards. Tick 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 tick. The sound was accelerating, sounding like the chattering of teeth. Suddenly, the clock stopped. The glass face shattered, exploding outward. "Get down!" Elias dove to the floor, covering his head as shards of glass sprayed across the room. The fire in the hearth roared, growing 5 feet high, licking the mantel. And in the flames, for one terrifying moment, a face appeared. A face made of ash and burning embers. It opened its mouth in a silent scream, and the library door clicked. Click! It was unlocked. Elias scrambled to his feet, grabbing Graves by the arm. "We're leaving. Now." He dragged the sobbing lawyer out of the library and into the hallway. The house was silent again. The sconces flickered with normal yellow light. The cold was gone. But Elias knew, with a certainty that made his stomach turn, that the game had just begun. He looked at his watch. Midnight. The countdown had officially started. The next morning, the storm had broken, leaving behind a grey, bruised sky and a thick fog that clung to the grounds of Blackwood Manor. Elias sat at the head of the impossibly long dining table, staring at a cup of black coffee. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whispering. Arthur entered the room, his footsteps quiet. "A visitor, sir. A Miss Abigail Vance. She says she has an appointment." Elias rubbed his temples. "I didn't make any appointments." "I did," Graves said from the doorway. The lawyer looked terrible, pale, shaky, wearing the same clothes as the night before. But he seemed lucid. "She's an archivist. A historian from Oxford. If we want to find a loophole in the contract, Elias, we need someone who can read the old dialect. The ledger isn't written in English." Elias looked at Graves, then at Arthur. "Send her in." Abigail Vance was not what Elias expected. She walked into the dining room carrying a heavy leather satchel, wearing a trench coat that was slightly too big for her. She had sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She stopped, looking at the grandeur of the room, then at Elias. She didn't look impressed. She looked curious. "Mr. Diamond," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. "I was told you have a collection of 17th-century maritime contracts that need translating. I charge double for rush jobs and triple for haunted houses." Elias blinked, caught off guard. "You think this house is haunted?" Abigail shrugged, setting her bag on the table. "I think old houses have bad ventilation and infrasound caused by wind drafts that cause hallucinations. I believe in history, Mr. Diamond. Not ghosts. Now, where are the documents?" Elias felt a strange sense of relief. Her skepticism was grounding. It was a lifeline. "Mr. Graves believes the documents are in a wall safe behind a portrait. I haven't seen them." "Then let's go find them," Abigail said, pulling a pair of white cotton gloves from her pocket. "Time is money, and judging by the look of you two, you're running out of both." The trio made their way to the West Wing gallery. This part of the house had been closed off for 20 years. Dust sheets covered the furniture like shrouds on dead bodies. The air was stale and cold. They stopped in front of a massive oil painting of the founder of the dynasty, Elias Diamond. He was painted standing on the deck of a ship, a storm raging behind him, holding a black book in his hand. "That's it," Graves whispered, pointing at the book in the painting. "The ledger." Elias stepped forward. "There's no safe here, Graves. It's just a painting." "Look at the frame," Abigail said, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "There. On the bottom right. The wood is worn smoother than the rest. It's a pressure latch." She reached out, her fingers hovering over the carved wood. "Wait," Elias said, a sudden wave of nausea hitting him. "Don't touch it." Abigail looked back at him, one eyebrow raised. "Why?" "Are you afraid of a picture frame, Mr. Diamond?" "I have a bad feeling," Elias admitted. His heart was racing again. The shadows in the hallway seemed to be leaning toward them. "Feelings aren't facts," Abigail said, and she pressed the wood. Click! A mechanical whirring sound echoed in the wall. The heavy painting swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark cavity in the stone. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a book. It was bound in leather that looked disturbingly like skin, with no title on the spine. Graves whimpered and took a step back. "Don't touch it directly," he warned. Abigail rolled her eyes. "Oh, please." She reached in with her gloved hand and pulled the book out. Immediately, the light bulbs in the hallway exploded. Pop, pop, pop. Glass rained down on them. Darkness swallowed the corridor, save for the grey light filtering in from the dirty windows. "I told you!" Graves screamed. "Electrical surge," Abigail said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Just old wiring." She clutched the book to her chest. "We need to get to some light." They retreated to the solarium, a glass-walled room that offered the most natural light. Abigail placed the book on a wicker table. Elias stared at it. He felt a magnetic pull toward it, a sick desire to open it and read his own name. "Open it," Elias commanded. Abigail opened the cover. The pages were yellowed, brittle parchment. The ink was a rusty red. "It's Latin," Abigail murmured, her finger tracing the text. But it's obscure. A dialect used by maritime cults in the 1600s. She flipped through the pages. It's a ledger of transactions. Cargo. Gold. Spices. Keep going, Elias said. Look for the year 1895. That's when the fortune appeared. Abigail flipped toward the middle of the book. She stopped. Her face went pale. What? Elias asked, leaning over her shoulder. The handwriting changes here, she said quietly. And the ink, it's different. Read it, Elias said. Abigail cleared her throat. October 30th, 1895. Transaction confirmed. The entity known as the collector grants the requested prosperity to the Diamond Line. In exchange, collateral is required. What collateral? Graves whispered. Abigail looked up, her eyes meeting Elias's. It says, the fruit of the tree. The first of the blood. Every 30 years, the debt renews. If payment is not made, the tree shall be uprooted entirely. Uprooted entirely, Elias repeated. That means. It means if you don't die on your birthday, Graves said, his voice trembling, the curse doesn't just take you. It takes everything. The money. The legacy. And anyone standing in the way. As he said the words, a loud crash echoed from the front of the house. The sound of heavy wood splintering. What was that? Abigail stood up, backing away from the table. The front door, Arthur's voice came over the intercom on the wall. It was distorted, static-filled. Master Elias, someone is here. Who is it, Arthur? Elias pressed the button, shouting into the speaker. He says he is the auditor. Arthur's voice cut out with a wet crunching sound. Arthur! Elias screamed. He ran toward the hallway, ignoring Abigail's shout to wait. He sprinted through the dark corridors, his footsteps pounding. He reached the grand foyer and skidded to a halt. The massive front doors were blown off their hinges, lying in splinters on the floor. Standing in the open doorway, silhouetted against the fog, was a man. He was tall, wearing a long trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He held a briefcase in one hand. But where his face should have been, there was only shadow. And Arthur. Arthur was nowhere to be seen. Only a single, polished shoe remained in the center of the rug. The stranger took a step forward. Slap. The sound of wet feet on marble. Elias Diamond, the stranger spoke. The voice didn't come from a mouth, it vibrated the air in the room. It resonated in Elias's teeth. We have noticed a discrepancy in your account. Elias backed up, his hand fumbling in his pocket for his phone, but his fingers were numb. Who are you? I am here to collect the interest, the figure said. It raised a hand, pointing a long, grey finger at Elias. 30 years are up. You have until the final bell. Run! Abigail shouted. She had appeared on the balcony above, holding a heavy vase. She hurled it down at the figure. The vase passed straight through the stranger like he was made of smoke, shattering harmlessly on the floor. The figure didn't even flinch. He just tilted his head up toward Abigail. Witnesses, the figure hissed. Collateral damage. The stranger dissolved into a swarm of black flies, thousands of them, buzzing with a sound like a chainsaw. The cloud of insects surged up the stairs toward Abigail. Abigail, move! Elias yelled. He grabbed an antique sword from a suit of armor display in the hall. Ridiculous, he knew, but he needed a weapon, and charged up the stairs. The swarm of flies coalesced back into the man at the top of the landing, blocking Elias's path to Abigail. The stranger backhanded Elias without touching him. A wave of force hit Elias in the chest, throwing him backward. He flew through the air, crashing onto the stairs, tumbling down, bruising ribs and cracking his head against the banister. The world swam. His vision blurred. He looked up to see the stranger towering over him. "Payment is due," the stranger said. He reached down, his hand passing through Elias's chest, gripping his heart. Elias gasped, freezing cold spreading through his veins. He couldn't breathe. His heart stuttered, slowing down. Thump, thump. "No," Elias wheezed. "Not yet. The contract is binding," the stranger whispered. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Bang! The stranger stumbled back, his grip releasing. Elias gasped, sucking in air, clutching his chest. He looked toward the library door. Graves was standing there, holding an old hunting rifle. The lawyer was shaking, tears streaming down his face, but he racked the bolt and fired again. Bang! The bullet hit the stranger in the shoulder. Black ichor, like tar, splattered against the wall. The stranger roared, a sound like grinding metal, and turned his attention to Graves. "Violation!" the stranger shrieked. "Interference! Run, Elias!" Graves screamed. "Get to the cellar! The tunnels!" The stranger lunged at Graves, moving with impossible speed. "Marcus, no!" Elias shouted, trying to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. He watched in horror as the stranger grabbed Graves by the throat. The lawyer didn't even have time to scream. The stranger's hand began to glow with a sickly green light. Graves's skin turned gray, then black, crumbling like ash. In seconds, the family lawyer was gone, reduced to a pile of dust on the library floor. The stranger turned back to Elias. The shadow where his face should be seemed to smile. "One down," the entity said. "Two to go." Elias scrambled backward, crawling on his elbows. He looked up to the balcony. Abigail was gone. Had she run? Or was she hiding? He had to get to the tunnels. Graves had said the tunnels. There was a way out beneath the manor, an old smuggler's route that led to the sea. If he could get out of the house, maybe the curse couldn't follow. Maybe the contract was bound to the land. Elias forced himself up, pain shooting through his leg. He limped toward the servant's door under the stairs, throwing it open and hurling himself into the darkness of the basement just as the swarm of flies slammed into the wood behind him. He locked the door, sliding the heavy iron bolt home. He could hear the buzzing on the other side. The wood began to warp and splinter. He was trapped in the dark. Alone. With a creature that couldn't be killed. And he had exactly 5 hours until midnight. The hunt was on. If you are terrified right now, comment "Break the Curse" below. We are just getting started. Elias turned on the flashlight on his phone. The basement was a labyrinth of wine racks and old furniture covered in white sheets. He moved as fast as his injured leg would allow, heading for the wine cellar where the tunnel entrance was hidden. But as he moved deeper into the dark, he realized something. The silence was back. The buzzing had stopped. Elias? The voice came from the darkness ahead of him. But it wasn't the stranger's voice. And it wasn't his father's. It was a woman's voice. Soft. Sad. "Mom," Elias whispered, stopping in his tracks. His mother had died when he was 6. A boating accident, they said. But Elias remembered the closed casket. A figure stepped out from behind a wine rack. A woman in a white dress, dripping wet, seaweed tangled in her hair. Her skin was bloated and blue. "Come give Mommy a hug, Elias," the thing said, opening its arms. Water dripped from her mouth. "It's time to join the family." Elias stepped back, his back hitting a cold stone wall. He was cornered. Elias stared at the thing wearing his mother's face. The basement air grew heavy, smelling of stagnant water and lilies, the flowers from her funeral. The apparition took a step closer, its wet bare feet leaving puddles of black sludge on the concrete floor. "Don't you recognize me, Eli?" the figure crooned, tilting its head at an unnatural angle. The bones in its neck crunched audibly. "I've been waiting for you in the dark. It's so cold down here. Warm me up." Elias felt a tear slide down his cheek, hot and stinging. His rational mind screamed that this was a trick, a manifestation of the curse, but his heart was a child again, desperate for the mother who had been stolen from him. He reached out a trembling hand. "Mom." The figure smiled, revealing teeth that were jagged needles. "Yes. Come here. Give me your life. It's a fair trade." Elias took a step forward. He couldn't help it. The hypnotic pull was stronger than gravity. The figure's arms widened, the skin on its chest splitting open to reveal a cavity filled with writhing darkness instead of a heart. Thwack! A heavy iron shovel slammed into the side of the creature's head. The impact made a sound like striking wet meat. The apparition shrieked, a multitonal scream that sounded like a choir of drowning children, and dissolved into a puddle of seawater. Abigail Vance stood behind where the creature had been, chest heaving, holding a rusted coal shovel. Her hair was wild, escaping her bun, and her glasses were cracked. "Don't," she gasped, wiping slime from her trench coat. "Don't listen to them. They use your memories against you." Elias blinked, the trance breaking. He looked at the puddle on the floor, then at Abigail. You came back." "I needed a shovel," she lied, though her hand shook as she dropped the tool. "And I found the entrance." "Move." She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, and dragged him toward the far wall of the wine cellar. Behind a rotting rack of vintage Pinot Noir, a section of the stone wall had collapsed, revealing a jagged hole leading into the earth. A draft blew out of it, smelling of salt and decay. The smuggler's tunnels, Elias realized. My grandfather used to talk about them when he was drunk. He said they went all the way to the lighthouse. "Then that's where we go," Abigail said. "The entity is bound to the house and the bloodline. If we get you to the lighthouse, that's federal land. Technically, it's not Diamond property. It might sever the connection." "Might?" Elias asked, limping after her into the darkness. "It's better odds than staying here with Mommy dearest," Abigail muttered, switching on a heavy industrial flashlight she must have found in the maintenance closet. They descended into the earth. The tunnel was narrow, hewn from the living rock of the cliff. The walls were slick with moisture. Above them, they could hear the muffled thuds of the house being torn apart. The entity was destroying the manor, room by room, looking for them. Why are you helping me? Elias asked, his voice echoing in the cramped space. He watched her back as she led the way. You could have run. You saw what happened to Graves. Why stay? Abigail didn't answer immediately. She kept walking, the beam of her light cutting through the gloom. I'm not doing it for you, Diamond. I'm doing it for the balance. The balance? Abigail stopped. She turned around, blinding him momentarily with the light. You think your family was the only one affected by that contract in 1895? Elias shielded his eyes. What are you talking about? The ship, Abigail said, her voice hard. The Lady Martha. The ship your great-grandfather allegedly salvaged to start his fortune. It didn't just sink, Elias. It was sunk. Intentionally. Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That's a myth. My great-grandfather was the quartermaster on that ship, Abigail said. She lowered the light, illuminating her face. Her expression was filled with a century of anger. Elias Diamond didn't just find the gold. He made a deal with the storm. He sacrificed the crew, 300 men, to the sea in exchange for the cargo washing up on his private beach. My family lost everything. Yours became kings. Elias stared at her, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You're not an archivist. I am, she said. But I specialize in retrieval. I came here to watch you die, Elias. I wanted to see the Diamond Line end. Then why save me? Elias whispered. Abigail looked away, her jaw tightening. Because if the entity kills you, it wins. It gets your soul, and the cycle resets. It will find a cousin, a distant relative, and the curse continues. But if you survive, if you break the contract, the debt remains unpaid. And when a debt isn't paid, the creditor forecloses on the collateral. The wealth, Elias realized. Exactly, Abigail said. I want to see you poor, Elias. I want to see this house crumble into the ocean. I want the gold to turn back into lead. Saving your life is the only way to destroy your legacy. She turned back to the dark tunnel. Keep moving. We have 40 minutes until midnight. They scrambled deeper, the path sloping downward. The air grew colder. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a massive natural cavern, a grotto beneath the cliffs. Elias gasped. The floor of the grotto was covered in water, glowing with a faint, sickly blue bioluminescence. And rising out of the water were the remains of a ship. The Lady Martha. Her skeletal hull was rotted, covered in barnacles, but the name was still visible on the stern. But it wasn't the ship that made Elias freeze. It was the cargo. Piled high on the rock ledges, spilling out of the broken hull, were crates of gold bars, jewelry, and ancient artifacts. Billions of dollars in raw wealth, sitting in the dark, untouched for a century. It's real, Elias whispered. All of it. Don't look at it, Abigail warned, grabbing his shoulder. It's bait. Too late. As Elias looked at the gold, the water in the grotto began to churn. A whirlpool formed in the center, spinning faster and faster. You have returned to the source, the voice boomed. It came from everywhere, the walls, the water, the gold itself. From the center of the whirlpool, a shape began to rise. It wasn't a man this time. It was a massive, serpentine construct made of oil, driftwood, and human bones. It towered over them, blocking the exit to the lighthouse path. The contract must be honored, the entity roared. A massive limb made of wreckage swung at them. Run! Abigail shoved Elias toward a narrow fissure in the rock wall. The limb smashed into the stone where they had been standing a second ago, sending shrapnel flying. Elias scrambled up the scree slope, his fingernails tearing on the sharp rocks. Abigail was right behind him. The lighthouse, she yelled. The entrance is just up that ridge. They clawed their way up the side of the grotto. The entity surged out of the water, flowing like a landslide of sludge. It was fast. Too fast. Elias reached the top of the ridge and saw it, a rusty iron ladder leading up a shaft to the surface. Go, he shouted, pulling Abigail up. She grabbed the ladder and started climbing. Elias followed. Below them, the darkness rose like a rising tide. He could hear the screaming of the souls trapped within the entity, the crew of the Lady Martha. He climbed faster, his lungs burning, his injured leg screaming in protest. The shaft was endless. 50 feet. 100 feet. A hand made of cold oil grabbed his ankle. No. Elias kicked out, his boot connecting with something solid. Mine, the voice hissed. The grip tightened, dragging him down. Elias's hand slipped on the rusty rungs. He slid down a foot, staring into the abyss below. Two glowing red eyes stared back at him from the dark. Abigail, he screamed. Abigail looked down from 20 feet above. She hesitated. She looked at the exit, then back at him. She could leave. She could let him die and get her revenge. But she didn't. She pulled a flare gun from her trench coat pocket. Where had she gotten that? The survival kit in the basement? Hey! Ugly, she shouted. She aimed the flare gun down the shaft, past Elias, directly into the face of the darkness. She pulled the trigger. Whoosh! The magnesium flare ignited with blinding white light and intense heat. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as the fire burned its oily substance. The grip on Elias's ankle released. Move your ass, Diamond! Abigail yelled. Elias scrambled up the ladder, adrenaline masking the pain. He vaulted out of the shaft and rolled onto the grass. They were outside. The storm had passed, leaving a sky full of stars and a massive full moon. The old Blackwood lighthouse stood above them, its beam cutting through the night. They lay on the grass, gasping for air. Elias checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. We made it, he wheezed. We're on federal land. We're safe. Are we? Abigail sat up, looking toward the manor. Elias followed her gaze. The manor wasn't collapsing anymore. It was silent. And then, the lighthouse beam swung around, illuminating the grass in front of them. Standing there, waiting for them, was the man in the trench coat. The auditor. He looked pristine. Not a speck of dust on him. Did you think, the auditor said, checking a pocket watch, that boundaries drawn by men apply to us? We own the land, Mr. Diamond. We own the rock. We own the sea. Elias struggled to his feet. Abigail stood beside him, holding the empty flare gun like a club. 2 minutes, the auditor said. The debt comes due. He held out his hand. Payment. Or foreclosure. Elias looked at the creature. Then he looked at Abigail. He looked at the lighthouse, then down at the cliffs where the grotto lay hidden. "For clothes," Elias said. The auditor paused. The shadow face seemed confused. "Excuse me." I said foreclosure. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady for the first time that night. "I don't have the payment. I don't have a son. I don't have a life to give you. So take the collateral." "Elias, what are you doing?" Abigail hissed. "You want the legacy." Elias shouted at the entity. "Take it." "I renounce it. I renounce the name Diamond. I renounce the gold. I renounce the house. It's yours. All of it." The wind picked up, howling around the lighthouse. The auditor lowered his hand. "If you renounce the inheritance," the entity said, its voice sounding like grinding stones, "you break the line. The contract voids." "Do it," Elias challenged. But the entity continued, leaning in close. "Without the protection of the wealth, the natural consequences of your family's actions will catch up to you. The protection will be lifted." "I don't care," Elias said. "Take it." The auditor stood motionless for a long second. Then, slowly, he tipped his hat. "Transaction accepted." The clock on the lighthouse struck midnight. Bong! The ground beneath them shook violently. "Run!" Abigail grabbed Elias, and they sprinted away from the cliff edge toward the main road. Behind them, a sound like a bomb blast ripped through the night. Elias turned back just in time to see Blackwood Manor, the entire massive structure, cracked down the middle. The cliff face beneath the house gave way. With a groan that sounded like a dying beast, the mansion, the library, the portraits, and the secrets slid forward. It fell in slow motion. The Diamond legacy tumbled off the cliff, crashing down into the sea below, burying the grotto and the Lady Martha forever. A massive plume of dust and spray rose up, obscuring the moon. Elias and Abigail stood by the roadside, watching the dust settle. The silence that followed was absolute. Elias patted his pockets. His wallet was gone. His phone was gone. The keys to the Mercedes were gone. He looked down at his clothes. His bespoke suit was turning to rags, dissolving like rot. "The protection is lifted," Abigail whispered. "The magic that kept your family untouchable, it's gone." Elias looked at his hands. They were dirty, calloused, and shaking. But they were warm. He took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It didn't smell of old money and blood anymore. "You're broke," Abigail said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "You are statistically completely destitute. The company stocks will crash by morning. The accounts will be empty." "I know," Elias said. He looked at her. "Thank you." Abigail adjusted her coat. "Don't thank me. I told you I wanted to see you fall. Now I have." She turned and started walking down the lonely road toward the town. "Try not to freeze to death, Diamond. Welcome to the real world." Elias watched her go. He stood alone on the cliffside. He had no money. He had no home. He had no name that meant anything anymore. He reached into his pocket and his fingers brushed against something. He pulled it out. It was a single, gold coin. One coin from the grotto. Somehow, it had stayed in his pocket. He stared at it. It glinted in the moonlight, heavy and seductive. One coin. Enough to buy a hot meal. A hotel room. Maybe a bus ticket. Or enough to start again. The face on the coin seemed to wink at him. Elias stood there on the precipice, the coin warm in his hand. He could throw it into the sea and be truly free. Or he could keep it. Just a little seed capital. Just a small start. He looked at the ocean. He looked at the coin. His hand closed tight around the gold. He turned and began to walk toward the city. The wind whispered behind him, sounding suspiciously like laughter. Did he really break the curse? Or did he just restart the cycle by keeping the coin? Comment your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories about secrets, betrayal, and the darkness hidden behind closed doors, make sure to subscribe to Whispered Stories.